and evil people too are there. The devil sends people to church too. And I think there's there's an awareness of those.
That's a good pull quote.
Well, hey, our amazing listeners. Welcome to another episode of Church Chat, a show where we have the conversations about ministry that you wish we were having, that you wish you were having, that I wish that I once had before I jumped into this crazy thing called ministry. These might not be the conversations you normally find on a leadership podcast or church podcast. That's why we're calling this Church Chat, and we are so glad that you are listening. My name is Josh.
And I'm Emily, and today's guest is someone we could call Dr. John. He's a
doctor.
He's a New Yorker with a Southern accent, and he doesn't mind giving blood. John Welborn, welcome to Church Chat.
Hey guys, how are you? Grateful to be here.
Yeah, what we didn't mention about John is that his amazing wife, Ashley, is a phenomenal singing voice, and a really cool story about her voice to boot. I don't know if we'll have to get into that today. And three amazing kids who, as a Southern, you're raising as New York children.
We have indeed.
Yeah, we will get into that for sure.
John is also crazy Georgia fan. So he has been living it
Go
up
Dogs.
as they have just throttled the college football scene. And unfortunately for him, he's also a diehard Braves fan. I'm a diehard Phillies fan. But we get over that and still somehow manage to love each other and root for each other when our dogs are not in the race.
We have Jesus, you and I, Josh. We always have Jesus.
We do. And I have Bryce Harper to go along with Jesus this year. Or Trey Turner, I should say. Or no, man, Braves are hefty. It's tough during baseball season. But welcome, John. We're so glad that
I'm
you're
glad
here.
to be here, guys. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, and we love to intro every guest by playing Two Truths and a Lie. Like John said, we encourage our guests to lie. Forcing them to lie. So John,
forcing Dr. John to lie.
Yeah, take it away.
All right, so it's my turn. Two truths and a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. All right. My mother passed away when I was an infant, so I don't have any recollection of my mother. I am an accomplished calf roper. So ride a horse, rope a cow, can do that. And I once broke my left leg slipping on ice outside my Virginia house.
Man, this is the hardest one so far.
Well, okay, I did do a deep dive on your Instagram this morning, and that's why I knew
you
that. You
cheater.
No, that's why I knew that he gave blood. Like he didn't mind giving blood. I am somebody who minds giving blood, so John is not. So
you've seen pictures that answers one of these.
Well, yes, unless you're being really sneaky and maybe you're not the best cattle roper.
I'm not the best,
but that you do it. Okay, but you've done. Okay, then that's definitely true. So, Josh, what do you think?
Thanks for the help.
I know.
I did know that. I did know he, and also even if I didn't know that from his accent, I do know like he looks like a rodeo guy.
Yeah.
A handsome
Thanks,
rodeo
Josh.
So
guy.
not the clown. Mm-hmm.
No, they have the hardest job.
Yes, they do.
Man, I don't know. See, I don't know. I've only known you as a New Yorker. I'm going to say that I really hope number one isn't true.
Me too.
So I'm just going to guess that you broke your left leg. That's the
lie. Lies.
I think we're
I broke my right leg on ice, not the left one. And I did lose my mother when I was an infant. But God gave me an incredible stepmother who's the only mother I've ever known. And his grace is sufficient in that, I get a chance to meet my birth mother someday. But I love my stepmother.
Yeah.
That's a great way
wow,
to think about it.
That's incredible.
I love it. Okay, we're going to jump right into today's topic. We're talking about kind of like what it looks like to be a pastor in New York. I know that's a really interesting location and area for ministry, and kind of what happens when it's open season on your organization. That can be tough.
Yeah, and man, so I think though most people cannot relate to New York, maybe most of our listeners aren't pastoring in New York. It does set the table for this really interesting conversation because you guys kind of like are in this hyper accentuated when it came to like the COVID stuff and coming out of that and the effect that has on leaders. And you guys have just been under the gun through the fire in the last 5 years and through a number of different challenges. What has been maybe the biggest challenge that you guys have faced or that you personally have faced leading through leading
I
through
appreciate
this.
the question, and it has been a unique 3 years for everybody. I don't want to diminish what anybody else has had to go through, whether you're in Pennsylvania or New York or suburbs somewhere of a major city. It has been a difficult 3 years. I've said often to several people in several interviews, if you led so much as a little league baseball team the last 3 years, then you've got some bruises, no matter what you've led. And New York is unique and has been unique. It was the epicenter of the initial COVID crisis, and so we were serving the Lord and trying to meet needs of medical professionals in this city with protective equipment they couldn't get their hands on, while we were having 1,000 people a day dying in our hospitals. So it was very, very real. I did multiple funerals, outdoors, where nobody was allowed to attend. So they, had cameras set up, and we had to, do funerals for people with their families waiting in the car, kind of thing. And it was a season of ministry we'll never forget. But I think what makes New York unique, at least to me, in the 7+ years that I've been here, is two things. One is the transience of it. Very few people stay here for the long haul. So people move here for the vocational opportunities, the job opportunities. If you can do it here, you can do it anywhere, kind of thing. And so they're usually here for a season. Not only that, they move around this city based on their season of life. So they may be in Manhattan with 8 roommates in a 1-bedroom apartment, in order to get that that first job on Wall Street, or that first job in marketing, or whatever they're doing. Then they get married, then they move to Brooklyn and get themselves an apartment or a townhouse. Then when they're ready to have kids, Staten Island's a good option, because here's where you can do the little league thing, and and kind of have a little more space. And then eventually what I discovered is Staten Islanders, their dream one day is to leave and go somewhere else. I didn't realize that was the case until I've been here for a few months, that my people think if you're really good and believe in Jesus, then when you die you get to go to Florida. That's the belief. That's the promised land. And so anyway, that being said, you minister in a transient community, so people are coming and going so fast. COVID accelerated that at an incredible level. The COVID exodus from New York City was not a media concocted myth. It really happened. We lost.
So it was there before.
Yeah, transience was here.
And then COVID just gave it like a shot of steroids.
Yeah, because people could work remotely. It used to be they needed to get their pension or get their retirement, sell their house, and then make that transition. Then it was like, why not? I mean, we've got former Salem members living in all the major cities of the South right now, and they're still making Manhattan money because they're working remotely. They may come up here 2 or 3 times a year, but they sold their house. They, for incredible amounts of money, bought, a much more affordable place in metropolitan Dallas, or wherever else. And now they're living there, and no mortgage, and, making good money, and, kind of have the life that they dreamed of. So we lost half our database from late 2020 to early 2022. I mean, half our database. And that's not just
cut planning center in half.
Everything. Yeah. So that's the very lightly connected, comes to an event once in a while, as well as elders. Like we lost half our database.
No, wait.
So
I got to pause here for a second, because I'm guessing that a significant amount of our listeners, just based on the average church site across America, right? Like if you're leading in church, you have the average church, I don't know, it's probably around 100 or maybe a little less. You lose one family and it is a shock to the system.
Yeah.
I can't imagine cutting it in half.
No, it was heavy. And I think, within that, not just as numbers, it's families, it's people you're depending on, it's people that were in your pipeline of, okay, I see this person become an elder someday, or I see this person, leading this ministry someday, people that were in the pipeline, that you really saw not only what you had now, but also what you saw in the future. So we wrestled with some hopelessness and some real despair during some of those months where I was having 3 to 5 conversations a week, with church members saying, yeah, we sold the house, we're headed out, and for them, it's very exciting. And I heard this statement over and over again. The one thing we're going to miss about New York is Salem Church, and they mean it as a compliment, but I'm going, anyway, there's a much deeper conversation there. But within the context of that great exodus, was just the difficulty of, okay, am I ever going to be able to do what God called me to New York to do? Because I didn't come here to maintain a historic church on the North Shore of Staten Island. I came here to make disciples and multiply churches to the glory of God. And so when you go from running 900 in January of 2020 to 350, during some of the darker seasons after COVID, when your budget goes from 2 million to down closer to 1, when you have staff that leave and move on, and you're having to give everybody new titles, new jobs, slash everything. It's like everybody's a slash employee now, youth and this, this slash that.
Yeah.
It's tough. It really, really is tough. So it was miserable for a season, and God had to do a work in my own heart. The doctorate you mentioned too was a blessing, because I started it right before all this kind of broke. So it gave me an area of my life to show progress. Like I got to work on something that wasn't the church, that wasn't in crisis, that was okay. I have this where I write and I research and I turn papers in and get grades and have collaboration with other cohort members. So God's grace in the doctorate, was evident, just being able to study and work on something, even while things weren't going the way that I wanted to in the church. So the first is transience. The second thing about New York is the indifference. There's just an indifference. Like to the church, to the gospel, to God, to the Lord, like it just doesn't matter. And so it's almost like when you do ministry here, you have to show proof of concept immediately. I'm from Georgia. There's a church consciousness in Georgia that a well-rounded life will involve a local church. Like whether it's Catholic, Presbyterian, Baptist, whatever it is, it will just, everybody knows they ought to go. They ought to be involved.
Yeah.
None of that here. I mean, just none of that. You run into people on the playground or in, different places, and you should come to church. Why? Like, why would I do that? And we offer ministries, like Celebrate Recovery or whatever else, things that we think are a blessing to the community. And we discovered that no matter how much we promote those programs, the community looks at it like, well, you're providing that for your people. That's great. If there are people in your church that need Celebrate Recovery, you've got that for them. They don't understand that we're here for them. Like we're here to reach them, to share the gospel with them. And so fighting that ambivalence and that general indifference takes years, just years. And you combine that with the transience, that man, it's a tough spot to serve the Lord.
Wow.
And I forgot, we didn't quite mention, John, you are the pastor of Salem Church located in Staten Island. Yep. So just for context, that's what we're talking about here. Okay. Talk to me about the emotions that you felt. And I know you've written about this on the EFCAE's blog about the declining church thing, but until you mentioned it, I hadn't realized that could be really demoralizing as a pastor, because your church is doing the exact opposite of what all pastors would want your church to do, but it isn't really your fault. Like it's not something you can control. You can't control a pandemic. You can't control people doing things to protect your own life and goals and whatever. So talk to me about the emotions of that and how you work through that.
That's great, Emily. I appreciate it. I think for me, mentors have played an enormous role in my own life. And that's part of what made that season even more difficult is my father passed away, who was my primary mentor, hero, and pastor, so I lost him in 2021. And then I also lost another mentor to a major scandal who turned out not to be who we thought he was. And so during that season, there were two pillars of my life that I felt like were kind of kicked out from under me a bit. But I still have been blessed to have cultivated many other mentoring relationships in addition to those two. And so one of the mentors, you mentioned the Declining Church blog I wrote. I was hanging out with one of my mentors and I mentioned that I'm pastoring a declining church right now. And he kind of got mad at me. He said, "You're not pastoring a declining church, John." And I said, well, I mean, we used to be this, now we're that. We used to be, I don't know how you describe it otherwise. He said, "John, if God forbid a terrorist were to walk into your church and kill half your people, and you had half the people next week than you had last week, did you have a declining church?" No, you had a completely outside, unexpected tragedy happen that affected you deeply, but it wasn't like you made bad leadership decisions here and there and, mishandled people, didn't preach the word, didn't share the gospel, and so he kind of confronted me on that point and reminded me that while this season has surprised me and many of us, it didn't surprise the Lord. So when God called me to Salem on Staten Island and, in the fall of 2015, he knew that 2020 was coming, and he knew what he had called me here to do. And so taking comfort in the sovereignty of God in all of it and just saying, look, this is where he has me for this season, this time. And, my wife is more than just my wife and a church member. She's a partner in ministry at every level. She sings, and she's also in her master's program right now for marriage and family therapy. And she does a lot of lay counseling right now through that. Wow. So she and I, she's really good to help me process emotions and, process anger and fear and those kind of things too. And so just a lot of late nights and long conversations with her. I stayed into a rhythm, in terms of vacations and days off. I didn't make any emergency. Okay, I've got to work 80, 90 hours a week now because of the situation we're in. I stayed committed to the process. The elders gave me a sabbatical in 21. So I got to have,
Wow.
2 months off, with freedom and flexibility to travel and that kind of thing. So yeah, there was deep emotions there. And I think those of us that came out of the, I call it the Liberty model. Like Jerry Falwell used to say to us students at Liberty, go do something great for God, get out there and do something amazing, incredible, that kind of stuff. And so the way we translated as pastors and preachers was, go get a church, grow it like crazy. And if it ain't growing, then you're doing something wrong, And so there was a lot of unlearning some bad things. Not that it's bad to have a growing church, but it is not the full story, just because there's more butts in the seats doesn't mean that it's gospel, ministry. So there's a lot of that kind of thing, but it's just been a journey. God's blessed me with mentors and a wife who, provided lifelines at the right time.
I want to circle back to something that you mentioned, and Josh, you could speak to this too, because I know your father recently passed away, and he was also a huge mentor and a pillar in your life. How do you guys pastor through grief? I mean, that's a huge aspect of your life, and it's draining and kind of an ongoing process. Grief is always there. So how do you continue to shepherd while you're grieving?
I want to hear from Josh on this first.
Oh man, I don't know. So I've done it twice. I lost my brother my youngest brother is 19, died 19. He was in a car accident. And my mom died 2 weeks after, to the day, from pancreatic cancer. So I led very poorly through that period of time. So I closed off, I was disconnected, I emotionally shut down. But by the grace of God and an amazing wife, I probably lose everything, in that year. And so this time I had resolved to do it differently. I'd learned a lot of lessons from that, and it had been unhealthy for a period of time. So, and I think by that leading that period of time, it's just the grace of God. Like, that was it. I was a young leader. I had just literally stepped into a lead pastor role, first time ever. So I had no idea what I was doing anyway. This time I was just really intentional about saying to myself, like, hey, I'm not going to be the person I was. Stay open. He was my mentor, my pastor for a long time. I had him on staff. He was our congregational care pastor. His legacy is written all over this place where I serve now. So I really wanted to stay open and process all of my emotions. I needed more spiritual help since I had lost the crutch that I would lean on. So I was intentional about feeling my emotions, processing them, and seeking out spiritual guidance from some new people. And it's rough. It's really hard. My church gave me 2 months off after he passed, which was just the most amazing thing for me, because they wanted to see me healthy. And just leaning on people, John was going through at the same time. And, we talked a little bit. We didn't talk in depth. But I got to tell you, like, I was glued to his story. Yeah. Every post he made, I was watching it. I was reading the comments of stuff that people were posting on Facebook on him, just because I knew, all right, like, so I'm not the only one going through this. You find a lot of reminders in Scripture, like, hey, you're not the only ones that are suffering. And I think just knowing, like, hey, it's okay, and I'm going to be who my dad raised me to be, and I'm going to lead the way my dad would want me to lead. And it was extremely difficult, but that was kind of like the guiding direction for this season.
Yeah, Josh, I'd echo everything you just said as extremely valuable, and having to go through what you went through with your brother when you were much younger and new to the ministry. I can't imagine that. I was in year 8 or 6 here and 12 pastoring as a whole, and being a little bit older, going through it with my dad too. There's some things we'd learned along the way. And Josh too, what he's saying is that we didn't talk a lot, but we were in that journey together. We both knew that for one another, and we ran at each other to district conference. I don't think we said much other than just a hug. And man, it's a season. I think it's one of the hardest things a man will ever go through is losing his father, especially one that had the presence and power that our dads had in our lives. I tell people it was gloriously but painfully uncomplicated. My dad played racquetball in the morning, had his heart attack that night, and never got to speak to him again. But I am grateful that there was nothing unsaid. There was no, there was no tension. There was no, regrets. You know what I mean? Like I know I could tell you exactly what our last conversation was about. I could tell you the last moment I saw him face to face and gave him a hug. The thing I miss though is my dad was always available to me, no matter when. He answered the phone when he shouldn't have answered the phone. Like, when he shouldn't have, in a meeting or, in a locker room or something. He would he didn't care. Hey, what's up? And I'm like, Dad, we can talk. Anyway, always available and always encouraging. And I don't have anybody else like that in my life that's always available to me and always encouraging. He wasn't much of an advice giver. But he was always praying for me, always offering a word of encouragement. So how did I lead through it? I got very emotional in a lot of sermons, because my dad was my pastor up until I became a pastor. You know what I mean? And so my preaching and formation as a man, husband, father, pastor, preacher is his fingerprints all over it. So for me to stand on the platform and go on like nothing had happened was not realistic. So not people knew that I could be preaching about tithing and I'm over there tearing up about it, and they know it's not about that. It's about the fact that I've lost my hero mentor and I miss him. So just being open about that, and like Josh mentioned, the supported church is everything too. If they're expecting you to perform for them, then they're not. It's going to be miserably difficult. But if they know their pastor is a person, like he's a man, and he has hurts and pains and difficulties and sadness like everybody else, then I think they're going to get more out of that season than we realize they're getting as we show them who we are, where we hurt and that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's a powerful.
I'll tell you what, too, man, that hug was the most meaningful moment of probably like months. Like there's just so much just being there for somebody, even if there's not a lot said. So I really appreciated you, John, and you always seem to reach out at just the right moments.
You too.
It was very helpful, and how blessed we are, man. Like, I'm just so proud of your dad and my dad. I'm like, there's part of me too that's like, yes, man. Like I want to aspire to that. There are dads like ours out there, who my dad is very similar to your dad. When I hear stories, I'm like, that's exactly him. And just so blessed by them, man. I will say this too. I don't want to leave this out of the podcast. I got professional counseling. Like I just hit up the best Christian counselor I knew. And it didn't matter what it cost or what other peers would say about my spiritual, that I needed to depend on that or whatever. And so I was getting some intense counseling.
Very helpful. I commend you for it, Josh.
So before we move on, I did want to circle back again to something you said, John. I love that you mentioned that you had relearned something. I think as pastors and people in general, we have a tendency, especially depending on your temperament, to just stick with what you know and be adverse to reconsidering anything. And I think that's especially scary in faith and ministry and leadership. Is there anything else that you have relearned recently in the past few years?
Gosh, there's so much. So much. I was thinking about it because one of the things we're seeing around the world right now is deconstruction and people sort of reevaluating their faith and throwing away some things, keeping some things. And I preached a series on that recently too. And so I believe basically the same things I believed when I was saved at 11, called to preach at 15. Like I haven't backed off of any of the core doctrines or that I believed then I believe now. I think I have probably less things. I use the closed-fisted, open-handed illustration, like the essentials are in a closed fist. We're not going to yield on these points. And then the open hand is, things we can agree or disagree on, that kind of thing. And so I probably have less things in the closed fist than I had back then. Like things that I thought back then were really, really vital and important aren't as important as I thought they were. So that's one thing, is just growth in that. I think another thing for our ministry here in New York is not falling prey to trying to keep up with everybody else. Because of my background in history, I go down to the South and I preach in mega churches all the time. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm not dropping. I'm just telling you that's my background, right? So I go to churches and I preach where they have 7,000 seat auditoriums. They have a full aquarium with the whole cast of Nemo in their kids ministry. You know what I mean? Like they've got baseball fields and they've got, parking spaces, and the governor goes to their church, like, you know what I mean? And I wrestled the first few years here with the realization is I will never, ever have any of that on Staten Island. Never. And it's not because I'm not a great leader or my people are not willing to invite their friends or whatever reasons you may hear as to why churches don't grow like that or you don't have those kind of resources. So I had to step back from that and realize that context is king, not just in interpreting scripture, but context is king in exegeting a community. So what is the gospel presence in this community? What's it going to look like? And not be tempted to keep up with those that are in the suburbs or in the South or in other places where it's a different world. It's a different church world. It's a different cultural world, different financial world, that kind of thing. So learning to detangle myself from that, I still appreciate that. I really do appreciate the foundation I have from churches like that. And, I love my friends who serve in those capacities in those areas, and I don't have anything bad to say about them. But just understanding that God's called me to something different. And that's not worse, not better. It's better for me, but it's not worse or better in the broad scheme of the kingdom of God. And just being faithful where I am. So what does it look like to make disciples here? What does it look like to advance the kingdom of God here, and not be, beholden to or, obsessed with an image that's not realistic and it's not what God has called me to do. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that about you. So I've known that I don't know how to say this maybe clearly, but that would have been an easy thing for you to do. You could be there doing that, right? Like Georgia boy, the right education, connections, lots of friends doing it. Like it would not be hard to imagine you in a church down there with 7,000 seats and 15 services, and yet you followed a call and are doing ministry in a hard part of the corner of the world, and have accumulated quite a few scars doing it. I think that's just such a huge thing that I admire about you in leadership. I know it's something you will downplay and say, well, it's not even a thought to you, but in a world where leaders seem to be more and more taking easy routes, you've just been committed to your calling. And that's just refreshing.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that. And it is a calling, and that's the only answer to it. Is you gotta, if you're confident what God's called you to do, you can endure anything. If you're confident in that calling,
right?
And I think if I weren't confident in that calling, then there would be many opportunities to step off the tracks, and go a different route. But God's grace has sustained us here, and I'll say this too: staying in New York and staying in Staten Island for as long as we have, with no intention, we're not looking to leave anytime soon. My family is thriving here. Like my wife loves it.
That's
here.
so beautiful.
My kids have friendships, and they like their schools, and they like their sports teams, and they like their life here. They really, really do. And I think a lot of people that come to New York and flame out quickly and leave, a lot of it has to do with their families not really also thriving in the midst of their calling here too, and so they end up having to go home for their wives and kids. So my stick-to-itiveness here is really not primarily about me, or I can see it in my kids and my family, my wife. Even in the worst moments of COVID, it wasn't. We had to make a decision. Shelter in place was coming. Like we knew, like what was Sunday afternoon, we weren't allowed to leave the house and we didn't know how long that was going to last. And we thought, you know what, we have somewhere to go. We can go stay with my brother in Atlanta. And we even thought maybe it's good for New York if we're not around, because if we get sick, and populate the hospitals, maybe it's better for us if we leave. But we sat around my living room and cried and prayed and said, we ain't going. We're not going. These are our people. This is our community. We're staying here. And so we wrote it out, in the neighborhood, and God gave us amazing ministry opportunities through those many weeks of complete lockdown that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And several of our staff did leave. Several of my staff team members did leave. And of all those that left, none of them are still here living here. So I think it also created sort of an anchoring as well. So.
This episode is sponsored by EFCA East, a district of the Evangelical Free Church of America. EFCA East exists to help develop transformational churches among all people by helping leaders live well, lead well, and multiply. We're here to serve you, whether you're in one of the 6 states that make up EFCA East or not. You can find more from us at efcaeast.com.
I want to move on, and because I've watched from afar and learned from this one situation that you had to deal with, and I don't remember exactly when it went down. I do know it's resolved because you told me that, but There was a situation that popped up in your church that's like everybody's worst nightmare. I've had situations that are nightmares, but not my worst, not the worst nightmare. And actually, what impressed me so much, and I'll let you share as much or as little as you want about that situation. But what impressed me so much is you had a situation where two people in your church, in your community, one were greatly affected, and you led without any kind of inkling, from my standpoint, of protecting your church or the organization. What I loved so much, what made me so proud to know you and consider you a friend, was that you just led through that with a strong focus on, we're going to protect these people, these victims. We're going to elevate them first over the organization, over protecting myself, over protecting the one who caused any of this or downplaying any of that. And that was just so reassuring to me and made me just super proud. Can you just talk about maybe what drove that, or about why that was a focus and how that all went down? I feel like we could learn, like, hey, it's people over places, and I don't know if you want to talk about that.
What you're referring to is an incident that came up in early 2019. I was on a 15th anniversary trip with my wife in Northern Europe. We were over in Denmark at Stockholm, in Copenhagen. And I woke up early, time difference. I woke up real early and had a message, an email from one of my staff guys that called me, emergency 911 now. And so as soon as I got up, I called him, and it was 6 a.m. in Denmark. It must have been 11 p.m. back in New York, whatever it was. And he told me that we had a message from a family whose son had told them that he had been basically sexually assaulted in one of our bathrooms by someone who was a volunteer in our ministry. And so the staff member was like, okay, what do we do? And I said, well, first we're going to pray. And we prayed on the phone. And I said, secondly, we need to understand that what we do for the next day and a half is going to be what we talk about for the next 18 months. So what do we do first? Wow. We were grateful to have on our staff at that time a retired NYPD officer who also was a licensed social worker. So he was a mandated reporter from the state. So the first phone call after we finished up with that was to him. And he was having actually emergency dental surgery that day and was under anesthesia. So he wasn't immediately available. But we got in touch with him as soon as he was lucid and explained everything, which was important for the process, from the legal process, because once he knows about it, it's basically out of our hands. We can't cover it up. We couldn't, not that we had an inclination to cover it up, but even still, once you pass it off to a mandated reporter, then it's basically in the hands of the state and the police and the district attorney and things like that. So once he had it, he was able to walk it through. Thankfully, there was no ambiguity. We know the guy did it. We were able to ascertain through some of our own stuff. Like, there was no, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, maybe it's being made up, that kind of thing. So that certainty helped us as well. And once we had a grip of the fact that, okay, this guy is definitely guilty, the immediate priorities we placed were, number one, the victim and his family, number one. And then secondly, it was our church family, like the children of our church family. What can we do immediately to make sure we secure as much protection and as much safety for them as humanly possible? So the PR of the church, liability of the church, my own personal name, didn't matter at all. Keep that out of the equation altogether. Yeah. The second thing that we did after kind of setting those priorities was I was able to find an attorney that had a history of representing victims in church sex scandals and abuses. So he represented the victims. Wow. Not an attorney for an insurance company for a church, not an attorney for a church, not an attorney that has defended churches and organizations. I found the guy who was prosecuting on behalf of the victims. And I went to him and said, coach me, tell me, where do churches go wrong in situations like this? And he did. And this guy's famous. I mean, he's got some very high profile cases right now in various major church issues around the country. And he didn't even charge me. Like, I didn't retain him. He didn't charge me because he was like, no church has ever asked this question. Nobody.
Wow. Holy cow. So like, that is.
Yeah. He came alongside me and walked through. We're talking hours and hours with me, my elders, he was just saying, he was coaching me every step of the way. At one point I'm like, do I need to hire a lawyer? He said, no. Why would you don't need to hire a lawyer. You didn't do anything wrong. Like you were doing everything appropriately and right. If you get countersued by the accused, which often happens, if the accused can skate, they will then countersue whatever organization accused them. And so at that point, he said, you're gonna need a lawyer if that happens. But right now, you're stewarding this down the road in a way that a Christ-like pastor at a Christ-like church would want to steward it. And so he coached us on what we communicated to the church and when. He coached us on how to turn things over to the police, how to respond to media requests, all kinds of stuff he gave us, and it was so powerful. He introduced us to an organization called Net Grace, which does basically coaching for churches on how to put their policies in place and also their practices in place in order to protect the children and minors of the ministry. So we contract with them. In the months that followed, we did a whole overhaul of everything we've ever done. All that said to say, God really blessed us through it. And what I mean by that is when the media got involved, they represented fairly our position. Whenever I sat on the stage and had my wife with me, she and I together, and our elders were on the stage as well, and we had to communicate to the church family on a Sunday, this is what we know, this is what has happened, and this is what we're doing about it. The church responded confidently. Now, we had some on the fringes and some that were just furious that this could possibly ever happen, and they left the church because of it. And I get that. I understand that. I don't disparage them, but our people, like our core people, they appreciated the way we handled it. And I heard from dozens and dozens of people in our church family who had been victimized as children, whose parents brushed it under the rug or whose churches blew it off or whatever. And they came forward in droves to say, the way you guys handled this, my life would be very different right now if my church when I was a kid or my church when I was a victim had handled it differently. And I made it very clear. Like when I stood up on the stage, I said, look, I want those of you that have been victimized in the past to see how we're prioritizing victims over our liability or over our PR, because that matters more. And then I even said this, and this is kind of the bulldog in me was like, and I want potential future predators to see the way we deal with this too. You will not be able to set up shop
the bulldog
in our church for 20 years and victimize 100 children. It won't happen here. And it defiantly just saying, we're going to do the right thing. The Bible says that we walk in the light as he is in the light. Right. So when this happened, it sucks. It's horrible. It's not what I wanted to be dealing with. It's not certainly what I want to be thinking about on my 15th anniversary trip with my wife, but it was what needed to happen in that season. And I think God honored it and blessed us through it.
I hesitated asking that question just because, I don't know, but man, I'm glad I did. I love the bulldog in you. I'm so proud to be your friend. I'm so proud of how you handled that and just jumped prayerfully and fast to the right steps. And those first steps, man, it was just such wisdom. And I know you wouldn't take credit for any of that, but just being willing, to follow that wisdom and take those right steps. And amazing that you reached out to that lawyer. Not to protect yourself, but to find out how do we protect this family. And man, that's just incredible. I'm glad. I'm so glad you're out there.
I appreciate it, man. That's mutual too. And you're right. It is not. I have an incredible team of people here. The connection to that lawyer was on my staff team already. Somebody that had worked with him in the past or knew of him, and so that connection was made very quickly there. And then again, elders. I don't have the final say at my church. I've got elders, so I've got a team of of 7 to 9 men, depending on the year, that oversee me. And so not only did I come in there and say, here's what I think we should do, they fully embraced it too. And they were willing to put their names and their faces and their signatures on everything we did, realizing that our insurance company wasn't going to be happy. They wanted us to basically shut it all down, not say a word, keep our mouths shut. That's what they come. Not that they wanted us to cover up, and I don't mean to say it that,
right,
but they didn't want us to say anything in trying to defend a victim or try to protect the church that would put us at liability risk for lawsuits down the road. You know what I mean? So it was they were very careful on those points, and I just had to let them know that's not a priority for me. It's not if I lose my job over this, that is what it is. What we have to do in this moment is do what is right before God and for those that have been affected. And so, there's a lot I could say about that season.
I'm bummed, man. I'm bummed mostly for the victim that holy cow, that should never. We all know that's something we never want to see happen. But I am grateful that you guys led through it the way you did, because I think it's an example. I know I had a situation not of that type not long after that. It's weird how our circumstances in such different worlds line up so similar sometimes. But and I used your letter. I used your letter, and I edited it and changed it, and it wasn't the same situation, thankfully, but it was a serious one, and one where we had a choice to worry about our liability or do what's right. And I think I used your example, and I feel like God blessed us through that season too.
I don't know about you, Josh,
So
but in our place, I was stunned because you have to name the accused, right? Because you have to give parents the opportunity to have a conversation with their kids, because the accused, the man, had been around our kids ministry for years, so you have to name the accused. You'll never name the victim, ever. And what was amazing to me is how quickly people jumped to the defense of the accused. Like instantaneously. How dare you defame his character this way? The truth hasn't come out yet. How in the world? Like, I'm talking publicly, like on our Facebook page of the church, we got excoriated by people, not on defense of the victim, but on behalf of the accused. Now, he's been convicted now, and so the truth has kind of come out. But I was stunned. I was stunned at how quickly our society runs that direction, in defense of the accused. And it was also around that time that Brett Kavanaugh was going through his Supreme Court hearings, and there was false, at least from what we could tell, accusations coming. So it was like, I think people were thinking of it in that framework about, let these things play out and all that kind of stuff. But as a pastor, man, I got told by a good friend of mine who walked through a worse situation than the one I walked through. His was even worse. He said, "Welcome to the club you never wanted to be a member of, John." And as a pastor, if you've had this kind of accusations or this kind of incident at your church, you're part of a club you never wanted membership in.
Yeah. So you indicated, obviously, he'd been around, and you had a good relationship with him. And you mentioned earlier about kind of the exodus of like even church staff and elders. How do you balance that as a pastor and also being a person? Like, my husband and I have run into that of like, how do you make friends as a pastor? How do you do with those relationships when you're both pastoring them, but also you need community and relationships? What does that do to you when people leave? How do you hold that intention of like, you have kind of some ownership of the church, but you're also outside of it? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I don't know how to balance that.
Nobody does, I don't think. I think we have to live in tension, right? So some things are, Andy Stanley said this a long time ago, I'll never forget it. Some things are problems to solve, some things are tensions to manage. And I think what as ministers we have to do is we have to manage the tension of personal relationships over and against corporate leadership. So there are some, and I have friends that are this way, they will not be friends with anybody in their church. Like, everybody in their church is a pastoral relationship. So they'll pray with them, they'll meet with them, they'll talk to them, they'll even do social events with them, but they are not opening up. They are not letting them in. They are not living transparently with anybody in their church because they don't think they can trust it. And a lot of them have good reasons for feeling that way because they've been betrayed. No pastor I've ever met that's been in it for more than about 5 to 7 years hasn't been betrayed by a close friend. Not everybody goes through that. And the other extreme is the ones that say, I don't care if I do get hurt. I'm living openly with everybody. Everybody's going to know everything about me. My door's always open. My phone is always on, my whatever. And they go to the other extreme, because they don't want to be isolated, insulated from their people, and I think what we have to live in a tension. There are those, for me, it's the elder body and the global team or the executive team, my staff. Those people have my trust. They have to have my trust. If I can't trust them, I need to get out. I need to go do something else. But they have to. So they know me. Like, I've got an elder meeting tonight. They know what I'm praying about. They know what's hurting my heart. They know, where my vulnerabilities are as it relates to, walking with the Lord and temptations and things like that. And so I have to live that way. But that doesn't mean that everybody that comes in my office gets that same look at me. That doesn't mean that everybody in my church gets that same opportunity to know me at that level. They have to earn it. The Proverbs talk about there are 3 categories of people. There are wise people, foolish people, and evil people. And I think there are all 3 types of people in all of our churches. There are wise people, there are foolish people, and there are evil people. Wise people you can have peer friendship relationships with. Foolish people you must have a pastoral relationship with. You love them, lead them, care for them, but you do not trust them, to have your back or to have knowledge of, things they could use to hurt you. So identifying who's wise and who's foolish, and then evil people too are there. The devil sends people to church too. And I think there's there's an awareness of those.
That's a good pull
Yeah,
quote.
and there's awareness of that. And I think you have a personal relationship with the wise, you have a pastoral relationship with the foolish, and you have a protective relationship with the evil. And so pastors and wives wives, that's key, wives too, kids too, have to have that understanding of those relationships, because I hang out with a ton of pastors. I lead an interdenominational pastors gathering on Staten Island. So I have good relationships with Pentecostal pastors and Presbyterian all over the island. And that's what they're telling me in these groups. They're like, Pastor, you can't have friends in your church, because eventually they're going to want something from you and try to take something from you and try to press that friendship into their advantage in some way or another. And it's right. I mean, I'm a pastor's kid. My wife's a pastor's kid. So we've been living this our whole life. And so it's discernment, finding discernment. So when people leave and they move away, it hurts. It's brutal. So who do you tell about that? Like, who do you process your pain with? Can't just be your wife. Yeah. There needs to be people. So in our elder meetings, we'll talk about that. How much it hurts that those that, you thought were bought in have decided to go to a different church because they like the music over there better, or, Christian consumers bouncing around. They'll use us for student ministry, somebody else for worship, somebody else for small group. They're just bouncing around to different churches. It's funny, they don't give to any of them, but they're, but they're free to take from all of them. And you get frustrated with that. So who do you share that frustration with? Because you can't own it and share it all on yourself. You need to share it with somebody else. So, what do they say? Who was it that said this? A celebration, whenever it's shared, is doubled. But a grief, when it's shared, is halved. So like when you're grieving, you share it with somebody else, you've halved the grief, because you're letting someone else bear it with you. When you share a celebration, it's like you double it. It becomes even that much more celebratory.
Oh, I love that. Well, I feel like we need to have you and your wife on, because I have all sorts of questions.
If we're on together, I will say nothing.
Yeah,
like she'll have the entire, and she'll have.
We got to get Ashley on here, man. Like,
yeah, for sure.
We got to get her on here. Well, man, I have so many more questions, but we are like closing in on the time, and I want to be respectful of that. And we definitely have to have you back, because I need to ask you questions in a future podcast about how to set a new course for recruiting volunteers, and I want to know more about what it's like coming from the South to New York City. And just talk about how you deal with when you feel like you're under attack. So, but we're gonna have to hit pause and like do that. Can we get you back, man, sometime?
Anytime. I'd love to do it again. Anytime you guys can do it. And I got so much respect and appreciation for what you two do in our district. You have weirdos like me in the places like New York that are so unique, but you have so many faithful pastors and faithful churches in our district that you guys are serving with good content and supportive events and things like that. I am so grateful for the ministry of our district, and specifically the two of you and what you guys do to keep people connected and informed. So thank you guys. It's an honor to hang out and talk with you, and I would be honored to come back anytime you think I can be helpful to the podcast.
Oh, man. I so appreciate it. I have some just awesome takeaways from this one, like have something to show progress with when you're going through difficult stuff. And, man, we all have bruises, and we definitely need to get Ashley on without John.
Without John, yes, we should.
We need to have John back, but we need to get Ashley on.
If you have us together again, it'll be 90% her, because she's that entertaining. She's done stand-up comedy before. Like she's performed on stage. Yes.
For real?
Like she's
my word.
And she's a songwriter, and my wife is definitely the superstar of our marriage. It's not even close.
That's amazing.
Well, thank you, John. We have one question. Emily, you want to ask it?
Sure. And I'm going to go first this time, because I feel like you always take mine. We end our podcasts by just sharing one thing that is saving our life right now. It can be silly or serious. Mine is going to be on the silly side, but I am so excited. I saw a reel today that said that Ted Lasso is coming back March 15th. Right. I love Ted Lasso. I love that show. We are soccer fans in our household, and I am just so excited.
So are you going to let Tim grow a mustache like
no,
Ted Lasso?
He would look
you like don't know
creeper.
Until you try it.
He has, okay, when he was a youth pastor, they would do a beach retreat, and they would always play a game where leaders would go disguise themselves on the boardwalk, and students would have to find them. And every year he would shave his beard. He looks like a weird 12-year-old, and I just cannot. So he does not ever shave his beard.
All right, I'll go next. So I have this congregational care pastor. I actually stepped into the role to replace my father, and he's this amazing veteran Philly guy through and through. So he gets riled up, but he has been like telling us about how he influences his grandkids, and he's like, I just talk to him and say, hey, just do 2 or 3 minutes a day. Just read a verse and pray for 2 or 3 minutes. I have found that I am saying that to myself over as a pastor, right? Like, and what it's done is it's leaked some real meaningful spiritual moments and time with God into pockets of my life that I had maybe it wouldn't have found that space before. Because instead of thinking about sitting down and really getting into something, really reading or really studying, I'm just popping 2 or 3 minutes. And I think that it's finding space where I'm more desperate because I'm rushing around and doing all this crazy stuff. I have so many balls in the air. It's like finding the space between the balls in the air. And that's been really awesome.
So saving my life right now, if it's funny or serious, I am in the middle of the most historic run of my college football team's success. So Georgia Bulldogs have won
so
2
jealous.
in a row. All right, they hadn't won one previous to that since 1980, since the year before I was born. All right, so I have never known the Bulldogs on the top of the mountain, and now they've gone back to back for 2 years, and they got a legitimate shot at a third. So I'm keeping up with recruiting. I'm keeping up with the coaching changes. I'm keeping up with who's going pro and who's coming back and who's transferring and who got arrested last night, for drunk in public or whatever. Anyway, so yes, that outside of the ministry and the family and the time with the Lord, I am keeping very close tabs on this incredible run that my college football team is on. So, as you said, saving my life right now.
Bulldogs, baby.
Yeah. Yes. Following the dogs.
I love seeing all your whole crew in the Dogs gear. I love it. I just love it. Raise them right, man. I'm not a Dogs fan, but I appreciate the savageness of your fan base. I don't. That's
no, it's not.
Word,
it's probably not strong enough. When I came to New York, I told them, I'm like, I'm not giving up my sports affiliations, and they're after my kids. Understand? The locals here are after the Yankee fans and the Giants fans. They're after my kids. Break. The chaplain, or the most immediate chaplain for the Yankees, is in my church. He put a World Series ring on my 6-year-old's hand and tried to recruit him to. That's not fair at all. Yeah. I told him that. I said, Willie, we support you as a missionary. I don't know if that's in jeopardy now. No, that's great.
I love it. Thanks so much for today, John. We don't have a fancy way of saying bye, so we just kind of just say, hey, see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
The Church Head Podcast is for educational purposes only. We dive deep into important and sometimes sensitive conversations and topics about life in ministry. Please know that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely the views and the opinions of the guests and the hosts and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for. Nor should our views or opinions be considered a full perspective of circumstances that may be mentioned in this podcast. Our perspectives are limited, and so will be this podcast. What we hope to do is have conversations and spark greater conversations that will lead leaders and their organizations towards greater health. The Church Chat Podcast is edited by Emily Gardner and produced by Emily Gardner and Josh Ott. The Church Chat Podcast is supported by EFCA East, an Eastern district of the Evangelical Free Church of America covering 6 states. EFCA East helps leaders live well, lead well, and multiply, helping churches find new vitality and multiply transformational churches on the East Coast. The EFCA is multiplying transformational churches among all people. For more information, visit efcaeast.com. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and can't wait to see you on the next Church Chat episode.